Hello. Welcome to Crown Lane on the Record, episode number 3. I am Lawrence Bradshaw, and sitting next to me is John Merriman. No, not John Merriman today.
I don't quite look the same.
No.
That mistake.
John is not with us this month. He's decided to take a short bike ride. He left Morden last night and he's going to Devon because, you know, that's the kind of person John is.
Yeah.
We don't have John with us today. Instead, an upgrade, one might say. Not John. We have the wonderful Cruz.
Great to be here.
Welcome, Chris. How are you doing this morning?
I am great. We've had about 20 minutes of laughing, so I'm keeping the tears away.
Yeah.
It's a great way to start the podcast.
Hopefully we've got all the joy out of the way.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, we've had a very funny morning.
How are you, Lawrence?
I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster.
It has been.
To bring up a cliche, but yeah, no, all good, thank you.
I'm glad we can have some joy.
I've got some notes here.
Let's do
as
it.
I normally do.
Absolutely.
And I just scribbled them down a few weeks ago, and it says, "Welcome to Chris." Check, I've done that. Why are you here? Who are you? These are my notes. So, Chris, do you want to tell us who you are, just in case people who don't know you?
Sure. Very short version. I am the in-house sound engineer / producer at Crown Lane Studio. I normally sit just behind Alex, who's behind the camera, behind the window, and that is my office. That is my life. I spend all of my time there.
You live in the control room?
I live in the control room, and it's good. It's great fun.
So any of our recording artists who come in will know Chris very well. Chris looks after everybody in the recording process. Is an amazing songwriter and producer. A few people have... Yeah, okay. I'm not going to go any further, actually, Chris. So, oh, sorry.
It's like, no, keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, plug me.
What I will say is there's a few people who've said to me, "Oh, I love your intro to the podcast, the music that comes in and out."
Wow.
Is that stock music? No, it's not. Chris wrote that. Chris wrote and recorded that music.
It's one of the first few things I did here, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, and like what a lot of people would know if they've been around the industry is that it's obviously split between a lot of behind a control room. It's a lot of engineering work and not necessarily a lot of production work. And the production leads a lot or lends itself a lot more to the creativity and stuff like that. But this was one of the creative projects that I put my hands to, which is great. And I cherish those because that's where I sort of fell in love with music and getting to do stuff like that and do it with John as well, who's great at what he does. It's been a joy, and we've had loads more since. So, yeah,
we're very grateful for that. Chris has done all of our idents, and they're all fantastic, including this podcast one that you heard right at the beginning. So, thank you very much, Chris. Who are you? Check, done. Now, today, our topic, I'm very glad that it's you here for this one and not John, because you know a lot more about it. We are talking about binaural sound.
We are.
Which might have a big question mark for a lot of people. There's a reason that you know quite a lot about it, because you wrote a thesis on this subject at university.
I did.
University,
yeah.
and you know quite a lot about it.
To jump in,
I was, and I'm glad that
I did write a paper on it, and specifically with sort of its real world applications. Is it a gimmick, or actually is it going to be something that is widely available? Is it the next step, or is it something different, essentially?
Perhaps it's not known too well about what binaural sound is. So, as best you can, to condense this down for the listener, for me as well. There's only so much I know about it. I'll tell you what, I'll give you my basic grasp of binaural sound.
Absolutely.
And then you correct me in every way possible.
Absolutely.
Binaural sound is taking stereo sound and then creating a 3D immersive environment with sound that at the moment you can only really get properly through a very expensive speaker system or headphones.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm going the right direction.
No, absolutely. You're 100% on the right direction.
Yes.
It is, essentially, it's just a little bit more complicated than stereo sound, in the sense that actually the way that we hear sound is through what is two microphones on the sides of our head. But it's more than that. We know that obviously the ears that we have are shaped in a specific way. And what our brain does is translate all of the information that comes from our ears to our brains and translate that to not just sound, but also get spatial information from that as well. So there's this really weird thing that you can do if you're sat at home. I'm sure you've done this before, but not really paid too much attention to it. But if you, without obviously having anything nearby you, as long as you've got a bit of space, just take both of your hands and just put them near the sides of your head.
I'm
Don't
doing
actually
this right
touch
now
anything.
as we speak. Yeah.
And can you tell that actually what you're hearing is different when you have them up and down?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And you can tell how far away you are from things and how close you are from things just by hearing. And obviously, if you can't see, that is another sense that you're using to determine proximity to things. And a lot of that has something very specifically to do with. This is the most prominent point. It's actually something called early reflections. So we know this in the music world, obviously through things like reverb and delays, but specifically through reverbs and how a sound can enter one of your microphones, so your left ear, for example, and take a little bit longer for it to get to your right ear. And by that, we can actually determine how far away something is, the position that it's in. So if something takes a certain amount of time to get to both of your ears at the same time, then you can obviously tell that it's probably somewhere in the middle or somewhere behind you, but still in the middle. Or if you're hearing it through your left ear first and it's louder through your left ear, then you can tell that it's on your left or something's on your right. And so our brain does a lot of this processes, obviously being the supercomputer that it is your interface and your door and everything that processes all of this audio. But it does that through to essentially a stereo pair of microphones and takes that signal and generates what comes out on the other side, and your brain processes all of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting with the sort of the spatial awareness side of things, I guess, and how you map your world.
Absolutely.
And then putting that forward into recorded sound. I can't help you. Everything you were saying there made me think of Linden Lodge School, which I was the head of music of for a very, very long time.
Tell me about it.
And a lot of the students there were blind. It was a school for visually impaired children. And the amount of incredible things that the kids could do just through their sense of hearing and knowing exactly who was coming down the corridor, where in the building they were coming from, without knowing any other information apart from the type of footstep it was.
Absolutely.
And knowing that they were coming from a specific part of the school. It's just like this incredible sonic
because
ability.
you know, like, I mean, we've all heard the stats, like 70% or 70 to 80% of how you perceive the world is through sight. And then at like a 20% is how we, like, is our hearing. And I think, if anything, that should tell us more about how much we actually process through sight as opposed to how little we process through audio. Like, there's so much that we do, not just with the sort of the spatial awareness, but also, I mean, our sense of direction and position all comes through through that same system as well. So if anything goes wrong with the ears, I mean, people struggle to stand and keep their balance and get really dizzy. And I mean, it's the same thing that happens when you get a flu, like when that system, when your sinus system gets blocked up and clogged up. It's not just that you can't hear properly, but you're very disoriented, and that's because it's a big part of how you perceive the world.
I actually had that. I told you I had a really, really bad start to my day this morning.
Was that it?
And part of it was waking up. My ears were a bit blocked this morning.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like falling over and around the room. I say in confidence. I say in confidence. I'm now about to say it on the podcast. But I said it felt like I was really hungover this morning, and I promise I wasn't drinking last night.
I believe you,
I'm glad that you believe me. I mean, England's playing tonight, so it might be a different story. But it definitely wasn't last night. And it's incredible how much difference that can make. It's having a bit of a blocked ear. Just to your whole surrounding. Anyway, sort of coming back round, let's get back onto binaural sound. I want to ask you about its practical application at the moment.
Yeah.
Is it being used sort of quite a lot? Is it being used in music or in TV adverts, or what's or is it more experimental? Is basically what I'm trying to get at the moment. How long has it been used for? Is it still quite new? Is it accepted within the commercial world of sound? Take it away, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so much to say about this, and a lot of it because there are the term itself has been used in different ways, and essentially over history. And we know this through. I mean, if you're in any other industry, you'll know that. Like you might use some words synonymously with other words that don't necessarily mean the same thing. So often binaural and stereo can get confused, and they don't actually mean the same thing. And so there's this really annoying and very obvious one, which is something called binaural beats. They are, that is a correct term in the most in the smallest sense, because it's technically using by audio, and all that's doing is playing two different frequencies at two on your left side and on your right side through both your ears. But that's about the most simple way that you could use binaural. Like calling that binaural audio is like calling your washing machine like a high-tech domestic clothing. Like it's just you wouldn't say that. So actually what would be really helpful is to separate out the terms. Stereo is essentially the base form of binaural audio. Binaural audio is stereo, but much cleverer because it uses more than just your left and right signals, and it uses more than just your pan pot. It actually uses early reflections. It uses it does also use panning technology as well, but it's more to do with EQ curves and early reflections than it is to do with just what you know in stereo. It's basically that. It's like stereo plus, if you will.
Yeah.
And actually, when we had a conversation about this last week, I was also guilty of this because I realized straight after the conversation, we spoke about binaural audio, spatial audio, and Dolby Atmos and surround sound systems in the same breath. And although they're sort of two sides of the same coin, if immersive audio is the coin, they're not the same thing definitely not from an audio engineer's point of view, because the kind of work that you have to do to translate audio to binaural sound is not the same that you do to a Dolby Atmos system, for example. And you know that because headphones have two drivers in them, so essentially two speakers. Some like higher tech headphones can have maybe 6 speakers in them, but that's the max that you can fit within that space. And a Dolby Atmos system can have 24 speakers surrounding you and then 10 overhead to create that. So when you think about that, actually, you then have to encode the audio very differently. So binaural audio can only really be experienced through headphones, whereas surround sound system audio, for example, like if you've never been in a Dolby Atmos room, you'd still know the same sort of experience from a 5.1 cinema system at home. You know that, like when you've watched Star Wars, there's like a starship flying behind you.
I remember very well when I was younger having my first experience with that with one of my wealthy friends.
Yeah.
When I went to their house and watching it was probably something like Saving Private Ryan. First of all, I'm glad John's not here for the film references, because he'd just be looking at me like a puppy. Not knowing what was going on.
When you mentioned Terminator, anyway, let's move.
But having that Saving Private Ryan and then having like a machine gun going off on a speaker behind me and thinking, what was that? You know? If I can just quickly swing back, Chris, I wanted to say, when you were saying about a more comprehensive version of stereo, I kind of see it in the dimensional planes, and I probably won't relate exactly, but mono sound being kind of like 1D.
Yeah.
And then stereo sound being 2D, and then binaural sound being 3D.
Absolutely.
Am I kind of on the right track there?
You are pretty much on the right track there. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Exactly that sort of thing. Mono sound is essentially something coming from one signal, which is the sort of the base form when it comes to translating audio, which works really well when you've got, for example, one instrument, which is so it's a source of audio coming from one one source. So a bird tweeting, for example, you don't expect that to come from like multiple birds doing the exact same thing. It's one source playing the same thing. But you then perceive that with two microphones, two ears. But when you've got stereo sound, that's something maybe a bit more complicated, creating multiple sounds. For example, let's take a band. When you listen to a band on stage, that's often expressed through two separate speakers on stage. So you hear stuff on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. And that's a really basic explanation of it. But that's how your brain translates what that is. So you then stereo sound expresses really well when what you're watching. So if you're watching something in front of you, it is able to express that really well. But then you've got binaural sound where actually what you're watching is all around you. And there's binaural audio, which allows you to be within that space. And actually there's kind of a level up from binaural audio as well, which is dynamic binaural audio, which is what I...
Too much, Chris,
too
much.
What my paper at uni was, my dissertation at uni was about, which... So it's basically the stage at which binaural audio, if you go onto YouTube and type in an example of that, you probably come up with someone cutting your hair, for example, which works really well because when you're getting your hair cut, you actually sat still. You're not moving anywhere. But when you come to an immersive space, for like if you're in VR, for example, and you're actually getting yourself placed in a world, dynamic binaural audio allows you to, for example, swivel your head and sound sources to stay put, stay where they are. And that requires not just the audio to be mixed in a binaural space, but also for the listener on the very end to have some form of like a GPS enabled device. So for
to track
example,
your movement.
Exactly. So you've got Apple's new, I think their AirPods do it as well, but the over-ear headphones do that really well. They're made with that technology built into them. So you can experience essentially being in a space, but also being able to move dynamically within that space and for the sound to react as if you were there as well. Because binaural audio is limited by your headphones. If you don't have that GPS, then when you move your head left, then suddenly everything's moved left. But that's not how you work. If there's something in front of you and you turn your head left, then it's now on your right.
You mean the world doesn't revolve around me?
The world doesn't revolve around you. Yeah, exactly that. And so when it comes to immersive experiences, binaural audio really lends itself to that because it allows you to get into a space that is now no longer your real world. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you essentially create another world where the visuals are convincing, but also the audio is convincing. It doesn't really work as well if the audio doesn't sound so great. Like you don't really get transported in the same sort of way that you would if when you're reacting to the world is reacting back the same way that the real world does. So yeah.
Lovely. I wanted to very quickly go back to something you said about stereo sound. And I don't know why I'm being so nostalgic today.
Oh, do it.
I'm being very nostalgic today. When you mentioned about stereo sound, I remember the exact moment as a young lad that I realised what stereo sound was. And it was a way that maybe a lot of people of my generation found out in the similar way.
You're going to talk about wired earphones, Lawrence.
I'm talking about wired earphones, about going to school with a set of earphones in, probably with a Discman, I imagine. And I remember the exact song I was listening to, which was Space Oddity by David Bowie. And one of my headphones had gone, more than likely the left one. And I didn't realise, and all of a sudden I heard the song that I'd listened to 1,000 times in my life at that point completely differently. And all of a sudden there was all this other harmony that I didn't know was in the original, the normal stuff, because he panned quite hard, Bowie, in his music. So I wasn't getting all of his main vocal melody, only the harmonies. I wasn't getting any of the drums. There was only one acoustic guitar. I thought, this is a brand new version of this song that I've never heard of before. And then started to really understand through that way of listening to it.
And that was a period of time where music was starting to become a lot more experimental. And actually, a David Bowie or Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon, they would just pan something hard left and leave it there, or hard right and leave it there, where before maybe things were a bit more like, no, here's where the drum kit would go. You'd never put the drum kit on the left-hand side, or you wouldn't. Guitars are, you sort of, the perception of it was very, there was a fixed, you were almost attaching the audio to something that you would see in real life. And we had this really interesting experience, myself and John. We went up to Talyard in North London for Tech Fest. And there was an exhibition there, and there was a seat where you sort of sat with a Dolby Atmos array around you, and they would play different tracks that were mixed in Dolby Atmos and allowed you to experience what that surround sound is like. And I sat there, and we listened through some pop songs, and then it came to an orchestral piece of music, and I was immersed in it. I loved it. I'm like, there's this stuff flying all around me. This is beautiful. I want more of this. And John walked away a little bit disgruntled because his experience of orchestras is that actually you're watching it.
Yeah.
And actually the cellos have a place.
Yeah.
The timpani has a place. They're always roughly in the same place. You don't really move those things around. So and he's also played in orchestras before, so there's a very sort of specificness to where all of that goes, and so when you're talking about immersing someone within that experience, the question becomes, how real is this? How close is this to real life? Because immersing yourself in audio isn't necessarily just putting stuff everywhere. It's where would you experience this stuff if you went, and the orchestra is always in front of you. You never have a string section to the back left sitting in the stalls. Like that doesn't work like that. So then when it comes to like how stuff was placed in stereo during that time, you started to break those rules during sort of the 70s, 80s, and like, let's see what we can do, and actually place a guitar all the way over there and then sweep him all the way to the right as if he's running from, no one would ever run from left to right, but that you could now make that happen with technology, and this is now sort of stages ahead of that, which is really cool. It's really cool to have gone from that.
Just trying to picture John disgruntled walking off. Oh no, I've got it. I pictured it.
Wasn't too hard now.
Seen it once before. Sorry, John. Hope you're enjoying your bike ride. Before we go to a break, I'd like to ask you just one quick practical question, which is, obviously we talked about the only real ways of listening to binaural sound is with quite a big speaker setup.
Yeah, well, through headphones.
Or through headphones.
Yeah, so binaural would have to be through headphones.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to something like spatial audio or something mixed for, it has to be mixed specifically for a Dolby Atmos system or a surround sound system. Even if it's a 5.1, you need specific encoding, which, for example, if you did with binaural audio, it actually wouldn't express it in a 5.1 system. So if I mix something for binaural audio, quote unquote, if I then listen to it through my 5.1 system, it wouldn't put the sounds behind me because I've not encoded in the right way. So binaural sound, this is where, I have to be the annoying person that's like, actually, no, that's not right.
No, do it. We need that. Yeah.
The problem with sort of doing and saying it in a, again, slightly wrong way. Even the first person, this isn't like, it's not like an unusual problem. Like the first person, Blumlein, who invented a stereo pair technique and called binaural audio, called stereo audio, binaural audio at one point. So this is like, this has been going on for a long time, and sort of saying things that are slightly different in a different way. But it really matters, for example, to a mix engineer when it comes from the sound source, so who we're recording, that's one variable. How we're recording it through the mic. Are we using a stereo pair? Are we using single pair? How we're mixing it, which is all about how we then sort of put it in a space. If we use any of that in the software side, how we then export it, how we encode it. Is it going to go to binaural audio? Is it going to go to a Dolby Atmos system in a cinema or a 5.1 home system, which is a different way of doing it? Then it goes to the user, and how are they going to listen to it? If I mix it for Dolby Atmos and someone's listening through their headphones, it's not going to be experienced in the same way. Or if they're listening through their laptop speakers, which most people do, all of that really matters.
A lot of variables along the way.
Exactly. And unless that whole chain is met, that's why we all go to the cinema, because we know that we can guarantee the entire chain. That's what we pay for. We're not paying.
That was the intention from the beginning.
Absolutely. But where we take it home and we're like, I can watch this movie and Godzilla's like,
yeah.
Like it works, and you can experience that. But actually, there's for so many reasons, there's nothing like going to a cinema or to a VR experience or something like that. Anyway, sorry, you were about to wrap up.
I love that point that you don't bring up film, because then I'll talk about it for ages. But on that note, I saw an interview with the director recently who was saying, like, I've just spent 400 million quid making this incredible film, knowing that 90% of people are going to watch it on a 4-inch screen in their bedroom.
And that happens with music. That really does happen. I mean, we can spend thousands. I mean, like, the amount of gear in here is worth like an insane amount of money. Our address will not be put anywhere, but like there's so much that goes.
No, we failed.
There is so much that goes into making music, and it's no secret. We know that, like, when we walk into a studio, we expect to have that caliber of equipment. For then someone to listen through like their headphones where one of them's busted or they've forgotten their left, and you're like, why? Part of you's like, why make all the effort? But you know that there are also people that care about this as well. So when it comes to cinema, it's the same thing, and then when it comes to audio, it's the same thing. Especially for people, and this is where it gets really cool, for people that, for example, can't see or can't hear, you then get to show a different side of the world in a really immersive way where they wouldn't have been able to experience before. So you get to do some really cool stuff.
I saw literally on the way in this morning, I was watching a video on the Foo Fighters and how they quite often they'll be in the studio, they'll record, they'll be mixing, and then to get the truest version of that mix, they quickly run out to the car park and listen to it in their cars.
Yeah.
And then Dave Grohl's like, well, a lot of people are going to be listening to it in their cars. And they'll go to his car, quite a nice one.
Yeah.
Listen to an amazing sound system. And then another member of the band, he's got this bashed up old thing. He's like, we have to listen to it through the worst speaker system.
Yep.
And then they're adjusting and changing.
Absolutely.
The song's like, the bass is coming way too heavy through this really awful sound system.
Yeah.
And then they run back into the studio and carry on mixing. Yeah. Which I thought was just such an intelligent way of doing it.
Yeah, and you have to. Which then begs the question, should we spend $8,000 on studio speakers? I mean, we should, because obviously it does matter. We did.
So let's use them.
But also, like, it really does matter that you don't just sort of sit in a bubble and focus on what does this art look like to me, but actually how does this express itself?
How's it going to come across to everyone else?
Everyone, exactly.
Great. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a very quick break, and in that time, I'm very lucky because Chris is going to be showing me an example of some binaural audio that was recorded at Crown Lane Studio. You guys listen to a lovely sponsor. I'm going to listen to that. We're going to have a little talk about it afterwards, and you will have the opportunity to listen to it as well in the second half. See you then. No, can we listen to the actual version, please?
Okay, fine.
Passionate about podcasts and sound? Dive into the Sculpt Mixing course. Developed over 2 years, this online course delivers top-tier mixing tips straight from our bustling commercial studio. With guided videos, downloadable audio content, and a comprehensive handbook, you'll elevate your skills at your own pace. Visit crownlanestudio.co.uk/education and enter podcast special at checkout for an exclusive 30% discount. At Crown Lane, we help you sound better. Download now and let's get back to the episode.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome. I just had to listen to some binaural audio.
You did.
That was recorded at Crown Lane Studio.
You did.
And guess what? Listeners, you're going to have the chance to listen to it now as well. And then afterwards, we'll have a very quick discussion about what it was. It might be a bit confusing. It was recorded for us for our education side of things that we do. So people come into the studio, they'll have a listen to it to talk about this kind of sound. So this is John talking.
Yes.
And it's him talking as if he's standing on the roof of Crown Lane Studio.
Yes. And slight disclaimer, please don't listen to this on your laptop speakers or through your phone speakers. Probably not going to get the kind of experience that it was designed for.
How do we need to listen to it?
Best way to do that is to actually listen to it through headphones.
Great.
Also, close your eyes. Genuinely, like a lot of this is actually working with. So binaural audio is about like working with how your brain perceives things, and so the illusion is broken as soon as your eyes are seeing something different to what your ears are experiencing. So if you close your eyes, it puts you in a different place.
Close your eyes, headphones on.
Absolutely.
Enjoy.
Great summary.
This strange example, but it's a good one. Have a listen.
Yeah, that's right. You're listening to me, John, live outside. And yes, I'm just above you on the roof. Just going to walk over to the top where you are. Okay, that's great. I'm holding a microphone and I'd like you to write down in the first space on your sheet some of the sounds you can hear in this recording. Wait, just 1 second. Hello. Yeah, sorry. No, I can't talk right now. I'm just trying to set a microphone up on the roof. I'll call you back. Right, sorry.
Okay, well, there we go. I hope you enjoyed that quite strange example of John walking around on our roof. I just wanted to very quickly ask you, Chris, how was that recorded? How do you record in binaural sound?
So there's a couple of different ways. The most obvious way, and actually the one that's been going for about 100 years, is recording with two small microphones embedded in a head-shaped casing. So actually the KU100 is sort of the modern version of that piece of gear. It's actually been upgraded over time, and that's what we use for most sort of standard binaural recordings. It's been used at Metropolis Studios, been used for loads of different recordings. It's actually the BBC owns one which was part of my dissertation, and I'm not sure if we're supposed to say it. We'll get permission, but we've actually had that one here in the studio. So I was a little bit starstruck seeing it here because it could come out of nowhere, and it's like walking around the corner and seeing like your favorite superstar, and it's like, is that who I think it is? Yeah, it's a binaural head. And that's one way. It's a really expensive way. It's in 4 figures worth of microphone. And if you don't have access to that, you actually have Roland do a mic pair, which is actually looks very much like a pair of headphones that you can sort of monitor and record at the same time. And they're about £80. They go in your ears, and they use your head as the head in the middle. And that's one way. And actually, what we're finding a lot more now is that a lot of the work is being done in process, so in post-recording, which is how we did that recording in particular. What we did was actually record all of that with one microphone. So it was actually John speaking into one microphone in the studio. So actually pretty much right here.
So he wasn't on the roof?
Not on the roof.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. No, that would be a health and safety hazard, wouldn't that, HR manager? No, actually was recorded in really in this space, and with a very good microphone. But all of that was translated in post into a binaural space. We actually use a piece of software called Space Controller. So it's by a company called Sound Particles, and they've created a plugin which allows you to translate pieces of audio into a binaural 3D soundscape. So instead of having to buy a Neumann to record something like that, for example, or even to use one of the Roland pair of headphones, because the problem with using a pair of headphones like those, or to record something with one of those speakers or one of those microphones, I should say, is that everything has to be accurately placed at the time. So if you're wanting something to be at the top right, it has to be recorded with that thing at the top right of the head. And if you want to change it later, it's very difficult to change that. And you're then also confined by the limitations in your room. For example, if you can't go back any further, then that's as far back as you can go. And in the outdoors, there's no way to control ambient sound. So if you're recording in a moment, it's the perfect take, and then a dog barks, then that's it. You're caught with that. But if you're in a studio and you record in a sanitary sound environment, then you actually have the ability to in post place things where they need to be placed. So there's a lot of recording engineers that are tending towards that a little bit more. Just you have a bit more control.
Safer bet.
Exactly. Yeah. So that would be the way you lean a little bit more.
Cool. I'm going to bring something up now. I'm going to be the poo-pooer
Ooh,
of binaural audio.
do that.
Which I feel a bit guilty of because you did a lot of work in university for this.
Go for it.
But my question is, how relevant is it? And I'm backing this up with, when I think about new technology, even though it's not new, but the way that it's being done at the moment and using it commercially, I can't help but think of something like 3D screens in our house, where in the late 2000s, this was the new thing. Everyone's going to have a 3D TV. It's what you're going to do. You're going to put on your glasses in your living room. And it just flopped as I predicted it would.
Yeah.
Is this too specialist? I can imagine so many places where it would work brilliantly. Say, for instance, at some sort of exhibition, like an art exhibition where you've got sound and it's all across the room.
Yeah.
For everyday purposes in music, in film, is it too specialist? Is there space for it?
Sure. Yeah, so to answer that in a number of ways. First of all, the binaural technology itself and the idea has been around, like I mentioned, for 100, 150 years, something like that, for quite a while. And actually what's happened is that the recording part of it was there and the idea was there, but actually the technology wasn't there to match up to it, because the whole purpose of it is to be an immersive space to record and to create this immersive soundscape, this world, this other world that you can listen into something, whether that's a barber's seat or to be transported to a different planet, whatever that is. It still has to create convincingly a different environment, which is really hard to do if your speakers aren't that great or if your headphones aren't that great and actually they're really tinny or they're like, it doesn't translate audio the way that the world does, for example. So for the last few decades, we've been limited on how far we can take that, but actually technology's caught up quite quickly. And now we're able to do it, to listen to audio at quite a high level, to the point where the layman wouldn't necessarily be able to tell what's real and what's not, for example. And for most people listening, you probably would have experienced this on a micro scale where you've been listening to something in your headphones, and then every now and again, if someone's speaking in the thing that you're listening to, or like there's a noise that an alarm or something like that in the piece of music, that you just take it out just to make sure that that's not coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Happening in real life, and then you're like, oh no, wait, that's a song. That's not, police sirens aren't here for me. It's just what was recorded. So we kind of experience that now in high fidelity. But that being said, I had a really interesting conversation with one of my close friends. He has lots of thoughts on everything, but specifically on TVs, which is why I bring it up, where he said, in his opinion, in his belief, that the TV has actually gotten to about as far as that piece of technology will get us. We can't really upgrade TVs that much anymore. Everything that we do right now is minuscule. Like every step up is making it a millimeter thinner, and then like a little bit thinner than that, and like that's as far as we can go. And actually we've sort of reached its limit. There's nowhere up from TV, which is a weird thing for me to think about, because I never want to be caught thinking, oh well, this is as far as we'll go. So like I think it's inherent.
That's what I thought about the Sega Mega Drive in 1993. I thought it cannot get better than this.
Absolutely. And like we're all sort of guilty of this in like different levels, and we think that actually this is the best that this is ever going to be, and someone comes along and then says otherwise, which is always possible. But it looks like the medium of television, in order to express art, to express a drama, to express whatever it is that we're getting from a TV, we're actually sort of happy with that. And we know this because actually we do have, for example, 3D visuals. We do have the ability to watch something that's a bit more immersive. We do have the ability to to watch something in VR, and not just commercially. You don't have to necessarily just go to a VR bar or a VR gaming studio to play something like that. You can buy an Oculus Quest for about as much as you can buy, maybe even less than a TV of the same quality.
Yeah.
But people are still opting to go for something like a TV, an LG TV, which is like, that's a technology that's been around for 100 years, like for quite a while. And it seems to be that there are more factors than just what's the most immersive experience that we can go for. And there was a technology war, and there was the like, is LG TV going to come out with the most immersive TV experience? Then there's the curved TV, and that's going to change everything. And we're like, no, that's insane. Like, all our walls are flat. Why would we do this? So all of that is like, and then your curved TV only really works if you sat right in front of it. So there's this thing of like, obviously, the experience itself, and that I think is, when an artist is thinking about what they're creating, that is their highest priority. But actually, when it comes to the end user, to the everyday person listening to it, for the person that's packing their kids' school lunch, for whoever is sort of come in after a long day at work, and they're just replying to emails and messages on their phone, and actually just want to have something on in the background. And for most people, having the TV it demands just the right amount of their attention. And actually beyond that, what we're asking for is someone's full attention. So when it comes to exactly, which, I mean, nowadays more than ever, we know that's something that's,
it's very, very difficult.
And it's currency, and people are paying thousands to make.
You summed this up really well last week, and we don't like to ever really talk too much about what we're going to discuss on the podcast. However, last week we did have a bit of a chat, and because I find this quite interesting.
Yeah.
You said it so brilliantly, which is the specialist side of it is very difficult to apply in the real world. And we said about VR, because the amount of technology there is for VR, if you're playing a game or, which there's so much sound, the sound element to it is insane when you're playing these VR games. But there's only a limited amount of people who have the time and the luxury to do that kind of thing. So as an example, we were saying about, like for me, as a father of 3 young children, if I'm doing the ironing or I'm doing the washing up and I want to have music on in the background, and I'll say, to my smart speaker, play a Beatles album, whatever, and I can have that going, there's no opportunity for me to fully get involved in that. And if it was like in a binaural sound, I'd have to stay awake until 2 o'clock in the morning when everyone's asleep and I've got nothing going on that I could commit myself to that.
Yeah, we were like, shh, kids, now it's daddy's binaural time.
Daddy's
yeah, absolutely. Like
selfish children.
So it just doesn't work practically, and I think that's
on a big scale. And again, when you're talking about the television version of things with the 3D stuff, that's why it didn't work. Is because people don't have that luxury, and people
I've got kids. I don't need a pair of 3D glasses on top of my existing glasses that I had to pay £100 for, and then worry about everything else.
You want to come home and have
life.
Coronation Street,
absolutely,
in 4K 3D in binaural. So I think there definitely is a space for this.
Yes,
with. For me personally, I would love it more in audiobooks. You and I both quite enjoy audiobooks and listening to them. I think it would be amazing to have more of that technology in that, and audio dramas as well, and really creating a sense of story and capturing your imagination with that 3D sound.
Yeah. I mean, so even with that, while there is still it's all about looking at the intention of it as well, and that the intention of it being, for example, with the audiobook, you could create a binaural soundscape within an audiobook, for example. We've been listening to the Ready Player One series.
And Ready Player Two.
And Ready Player Two. I've not gotten quite as far as Lawrence. But there's definitely space for this. And I think what it's requiring is actually it being done well. So you could listen to it, let's talk about the limitations with that. Even for the audiobook, there's often a time where I would listen through just one pair of headphones because I'm doing something else at the same time. So even when it comes to that, to enjoy what is the binaural experience within that space as well still requires a certain amount of attention. Again, not a bad thing in any way, but also what that comes with is it requires a bit of time, a bit of attention. And like if you're on your commute into work and sat on a bus with 50 other sticky, hot, sweaty people on a sunny, like it just takes a little bit away from that experience. But that being said, that is something, if used cleverly, if you're not spinning the person's voice around your head the entire experience and actually just using it to accentuate sound effects or to bring in tension using different frequencies, it's very possible to bring that into the space. And I think same as the podcast world, we're sort of at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do. We're sort of doing it commercially quite widely on a very basic level right now. And there's this far more that actually I think will become a lot more mainstream as people discover, hey, why don't I just put a little bit of this in here during this time? And I've seen it used a couple of times in really basic ways just to like start an episode, but not necessarily to create tension, to the same way that we listen to sound scores, and like we know that exists in order to do the same thing.
You need to use it intelligently, though.
Absolutely.
Because again, going back to film again, with 3D, again, there were times when that was getting really big, and it was being littered throughout the film, which is the good way of doing it, but directors choosing these most stupid things to do. I remember seeing Final Destination, one of those films, which I loved, although they're awful. I loved them. But there was a 3D one, and one scene, it was just two people talking, and the fence behind them was in 3D. It was like, why did you choose that to be the
Honestly,
part?
And just so many things. Even when it comes to like, and they did this a lot with like kids programs and stuff like that. That was like really, and like Spy Kids was like one of the biggest at the time.
I remember that.
And the amount of things that popped out that you're like, that didn't add, like end user, that actually didn't add anything to the story and for the initial intention. In fact, if anything, that distracted you from the initial point.
So that's with sound.
Yeah,
I think if you are going to use it in small areas and just be intelligent with what you're doing it with to assist with your story or your narrative of your music that you're trying to get across, and not doing it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, and we all know this. So we all know this.
Don't be the fence.
Yeah, don't be the fence. We all know this on a very sort of like simple scale. In like, if you're in a band, if you've ever played in a band, you know that whatever instrument you're playing with, if you're playing that at full pelt the entire time, that would be insane, because this isn't just about you. Yeah. So when you play, there might be times where it's a bit about you and you turn up a little, but actually the rest of the time you're working with what everything else is going around. And right now we're sort of seeing the gimmick part of this, where maybe it's more of the experimental side. So actually we're seeing the quote unquote the 80s. This is quite a big statement, so like I will regret this later.
Here we go.
But we're seeing the experimentalness of what we saw in music around the 70s, 80s, where we would sort of do a thing, see where that would lead us. This sounds really cool. Okay, and maybe we shouldn't have something like panned hard left the entire time. Let's rein that back in. And we're sort of going through that process now with different technologies like binaural audio, and with mediums such as audiobooks and with podcasts, because spoken word has taken off, obviously through lockdown and
hugely in a way that I never thought it would.
Who would have?
I think anybody did.
Who would have?
We're sat here doing it right
like,
now.
I want to talk less. I want to hear people talk less.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it's working.
Great. Well, what we're going to do is we're gonna wrap up now. Very, very quickly, I wanted to talk about our tips and tricks. You've actually already brought this up. So just a very quick reminder, what I wanted to ask is if people did want to experiment with this at home, on the cheap, you don't want to invest loads of money in it, but you do want to give it a go. You were mentioning those, which are those headphones that you were recommending?
So Roland have a pair of headphones. If you just search up Roland binaural earphones, and
it was reasonably priced,
80, 90 pounds,
which
something
is pretty
like that,
good, actually.
Which is insane for something like that.
If you want to have a little go, and you record through the headphones, right?
You record through the headphones, exactly. So it's essentially primarily a microphone, but you can also listen to you can listen to the audio as it's being recorded. I mean, most earphones actually have this technology in them. So if you have any pair of headphones with active noise cancelling, all that is doing is taking it is using the mics in the earphones to play back the sound, the ambient sound, everything that's going on in the real world, but actually flipping the phase. So it's then inverting the audio.
I learned about this recently.
Yeah.
It is fascinating.
It's insane. And you can do that, like they do that very fast, but it's using the same technology. So that technology isn't old. It's actually something that we've now streamlined quite well, and is to the point where we can do that with wireless headphones. So something like a wired pair of the Roland microphones that you can use work really well. Just make sure you're in a good space and a controlled space to use something like that. You can use them out in the real world. Like, feel free. I've seen someone use it with like a car driving video, but then say that it was really boomy and like it was like all he could hear was like really low end. Well, that's what happens if you're in a car. So it's paying attention to all of those things that actually, and being hyper aware of actually what you hear when you're in different environments. If you're in a car, actually you do hear and you do feel a lot of the low rumble, and a microphone tells you that, where your brain actually blocks it out.
It's very honest.
It is very honest. So make
Too
sure,
honest.
yeah. So make sure that you're in a space where you can control everything as much as possible, or that you're happy with not controlling everything and capturing everything as is.
Great.
So that would be the best way.
Also, we're not sponsored by Roland.
We're not. No.
If they're listening, please do.
We would love to be sponsored by Roland.
We're not, Okay, great. And then the last things are recommendations. This is a recommendation from me, from whoever's on the other side, of anything that you've been listening to, any events that you've been to, venues, anything to do with the world of sound and music. Have you got anything to recommend to our lovely listeners?
There is so much.
Keep it short, we're right at the end.
I know. Okay, so I've just found an 80s style band, because they're not from the 80s.
Okay.
Definitely. They're called At Midnight, I believe. They are really cool. I love the sound of the 80s anyway, so this is feeding all my nostalgia for a time that I wasn't there. So they're really cool. I also saw a really cool band recently. Shameless plug to someone in the studio. One of our marketing managers. As if we have more than one.
She's giggling, actually.
She is. Look, the camera's shaking a little bit.
Oh, yeah. She's in this room, I think.
No, Alex actually played an insane gig at Stoke Newington. I forget the venue.
What was the venue, Alex?
It was the waiting room. It was the waiting room. And stunning gig. It was a really cool atmosphere. And you are going to be playing a few more shows soon. Exciting. She'll be paying me for that later.
Nice, okay.
But those are really cool.
Great.
Yeah,
Nice.
More recommendations for later.
My recommendation...
Tell me.
Well, I'm going to Boogie Town Festival in September. So talking about 80s...
Tell me about Boogie Town.
Boogie Town is basically... the lesser stars of the 80s, perhaps, who they get them out of the supermarkets they're now working in.
Sure.
And they say, do you want to come and perform again?
Sure.
That's really harsh version of it. There's a lot of B artists who are there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
listen, all of the working artists of the 80s who actually, like...
It's so harsh what I just
had
said.
better things to do with their lives.
Yeah. But no,
moved on.
Coming on to it is one of those who were a very successful group in the 80s. It was Wet, Wet, Wet. And... I will say they're a guilty pleasure of mine, except you shouldn't really say that, should you? You should be proud of who you listen to.
Sometimes you can be a bit guilty.
No.
But wait.
I listen to, just as a disclaimer, I listen to classical music. I listen to folk music from the 1600s.
You do.
I listen to screaming metal.
You do.
I listen to punk. I listen to pop. I listen to everything. I really like pretty much every genre of music. Very cliche to say, but I do. One of those is Wet, Wet, Wet. And I've really been listening to them a lot recently, again, because I'm seeing them at Boogie Town.
Yeah.
And it just filled me with happiness.
Good.
So I'm
As it
not
should.
being guilty pleasure about it. I'm being proud of it.
Pleasure. Happy pleasure.
And the weird thing is, in our break, you started singing Love Is All Around. And this is always going to be my thing. Anyway, so that's it. My recommendation, have a listen to Wet, Wet, Wet. Maybe their greatest hits. And also, don't be afraid of who you like to listen to.
Absolutely.
Don't be embarrassed.
Yeah. Hit up a VR bar. Enjoy some binaural audio.
Absolutely, that's another really good
and
recommendation.
enjoy some immersive experiences.
In July, we're going to be having a workshop. We always follow up these podcasts with a workshop. Our workshop is going to be on binaural sound.
Indeed.
Chris is going to be there. The date and the details will be in the episode description, so do check that out. Otherwise, we'll be back next month. We're talking about how to get paid in the music industry. Oh my word.
Nice simple one then.
Yeah, nice, easy one to talk about. So thinking about everything that you need to do in order to get paid, best ways of getting there.
Yeah. I'll let my boss handle that one.
Yeah, we'll get John in for that one, I think. But otherwise, thank you very much, Chris, for being
It's been
here.
a pleasure.
Don't
Do
go
this again.
on any long cycles.
Not to Devon.
Not to Denver.
No, I'm enjoying the pictures from afar.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you to Alex.
See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you very much.